I don't think that you want the wool pulled over your eyes. I don't think that you want to go around believing in a myth, as it were.
No, I don't.
And what caught my attention is that you were looking upon the work of Randy and the Skeptics as rather a mythical enterprise that they're involved in, and you want to challenge them.
That's right. Guys like Randy misrepresent what they really stand for. Their sales pitch sounds very appealing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really look into the backgrounds, what they really stand for, it's horrifying.
Well, let's remember that the word skeptics is a derivative of the Greek town of Skeptos, which was the city of ignorance.
Pyro, if I remember right, was the original skeptic. And then later on, in the modern philosophy, there was David Hume, who also fought a lot with the religious people of his time.
Yeah.
17th century.
Well, you always, whenever you're on a forefront of thought, you're going to run into this. Now, I don't want to put the skeptics down altogether. I think healthy skepticism is a very, very important process of education.
Yes, it is.
And without it, we could run amok. Our imaginations could just take us into all different directions. So we need to keep our feet on the ground. But at the same time, skepticism that is in itself run amok.
Right, absolutely.
Stops the advancement of mankind, of the understanding of the world that we live in and the realities.
Right, they throw obstacles in our way.
For reasons of ego, usually, more than anything else.
Right, definitely.
But let me ask you a few questions. Now, you have been involved in the research of UFOs for some time. Is there such a thing as a UFO?
Yes, they're very real. And that's what I've been trying to tell people. The Herald Examiner offered a $10,000 prize recently for show evidence of a UFO encounter. And I thought, great, this is my chance to get some of my new information out.
All right.
So I accepted this challenge and discussed it with Al Seckel, and we agreed on the preliminaries. And then I found out that the money was really from Randy, and I was supposed to contact him and make arrangements. And knowing Randy, I knew there was no hope of ever...
I've never had the opportunity to meet Randy, but I have had an opportunity to meet a number of people who are involved in, there are psychics, for instance. There are people who can walk on hot coals, which I do. There are people in the UFO investigation. I mean, you're looking now at classified government documents. We have the government of the United States saying that there are UFOs.
Right.
And they didn't like to give up that information, but out of the Freedom of Information Act, they had to.
Really.
The government has
the CIA
had to admit that there are UFOs.
A lot of documents.
But then we find that when you start confronting these people with this level of information, they do things like this letter you have here that you sent to Randy and was refused. However,
Randy's last letter
had been opened and sent back to you, refused.
Randy's last letter, he warned me that part of the agreement that's in his book, Flim Flam, that I was to send a self-addressed stamped envelope. That his last two letters, he had to pay the postage. They owed him 44 cents. That if I would send that to him, he would reply to my request for the $10,000 challenge and proceed.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that. I sent him his 44 cents and a letter, nice lengthy letter. And this is what I got back. Refused.
I refused an open letter.
But he didn't refuse it. He actually steamed the letter open, did a sloppy job. You can see all the seams are coming apart. Put a little bit of glue on the top flap. And
you don't want to get up his $10,000 because Randy has had to have seen by now the documents that are flowing out of the government.
He's afraid that...
certainly the documents that have come out of the incident in the recent incident in England and the one in northern New York, around Brewster, New York.
He knows I'm serious about this thing. I've been around a while.
So the skeptics are on notice. Any time that Randy or any of the skeptic group want to get together with these microphones and do their thing with the UFO people who can do their thing.
I'd like to meet this guy. I know his tricks.
This is the birds in May. I may have to shuffle somebody around.
He's not going to fool me one bit.
Put him on there. Well, what's some of the new information that you have about the UFOs, the reality of the UFO? John, we want to talk about that, and I know that the audience would want to talk to you about what they have seen, what they want to know about.
Right. There are so many people out there that have seen UFOs, and that's where the heaviest evidence really is. When you talk to someone who's seen a UFO up close. I'm talking 100 feet, 200 feet, and when there's more than one witness. All of these documentaries and books are just full of lights in the sky a great distance away, and there's no need to fool around with that kind of, when we have so many good sightings.
Well, this is one of the things that we talk about here, because I agree with you, and just from the people I've talked to, the calls that come in when we talk about UFOs in this show, a lot of people have seen a lot of lights.
Right.
And the lights are rather dramatic, and there's something to see, lights in the sky that are doing things that they're not supposed to be. I've seen that once, where I thought it was a satellite coming over, and all at once it stopped and did a 90-degree turn to the left and then a 90-degree turn to the right.
Don't do that.
And, in fact, we sat out, my whole family and a lot of our friends, and watched this cavorting around in the sky. Balloons don't do that. For, I guess, about an hour and a half, and then all at once it kind of locked into position with one of the constellations, and then just floated off into, the nighttime sky.
We get a lot of those.
But, all you can see is a light. There are so many more fascinating contacts that people have had where you can see the ship itself. You can see the lights in the ship. You can see maybe it landing or hovering or doing other strange things. And, of course, others have gone on and had other encounters, which are quite fascinating in themselves. How deeply involved are you, and why did you get into the UFO phenomenon?
Well, that's a long story, and I've...
Make it short.
I guess I get...
Make it short and tell us about it.
Be brief.
Well, before
you
do that, I'm going to have to do something that I'll have to do from time to time throughout the course of the evening. And that's pause for a minute, take a sip of coffee, sell you something. It's Open Mind. John D. Herrera is with me. John is with APRO and MUFON, which is a UFO investigative organization, and two very, very fine ones. He has a lot of information, and you'll have a chance to talk to John in just a few minutes about the reality of the UFO. And we want to talk to you about the UFO, any of the questions that you may have about it. Speaking of that, let me have that little computer readout I gave you a second there, John, about what's coming up, because we're going to continue this next week in a very different fashion. We'll talk about the UFOs as they are existing right now and the latest information on them and what we have found out. But next week in studio will be author and researcher Zecharia Sitchin. Zecharia has written two really formidable books in the past. One of them is called The 12th Planet, the other one Stairway to Heaven. And his newest book is called The Wars of Gods and Men. Now, Zechariah's research deals with the ancient records of the Sumerians and the writings out of Mesopotamia and Babylonia. And what we see is that there were some very early science fiction writers back there, or they were making some very accurate observations about what was going on in their world, about the intervention into Earth life of alien beings. And as Zechariah will point out in his new book, The Wars of Gods and Men, that the first nuclear war on this planet occurred 2002 B.C., and that comes out of the ancient record, and we'll discover how the area of Mesopotamia and Babylonia was devastated by that, and, by the way, still is as of today. It's just arid wasteland, and it was a nuclear blast that happened back there, a nuclear war. So I invite you to join me next week for that. On July 27th, one of the most important shows of the year will occur here as Thomas E. Bearden joins me again. Thomas is leading America's efforts in the research into Soviet weather control, and it is now the contention of a large group of scientists, and we'll go into that with you, that the United States is engaged in an undeclared war with the Soviet Union, and the weapons is weather. And the weather that we've been experiencing this last week, I think you will find out, was engineered by the Soviet Union. The weather we experienced last December and January here in Southern California, across New Mexico, Arizona, into Texas, and on up the Adirondack chain where they had record low temperatures, was engineered by the Soviet Union. That only killed 430 people. And we lost the corn crop the year before because of Soviet weather engineering. Half the corn crop. And they were just playing around. I invite you to join me on the 27th of July for Thomas Bearden. We'll show you exactly how that's done, the science behind it, and why it is something we do need to pay attention to. I think that perhaps we can add 3 more to the list of casualties in this undeclared war as of the events here in Los Angeles in the last week. On August 3rd, Dr. Philip Berg will be with me. He is the world's leading expert, I guess, on the Kabbalah, the Jewish oral history. And the Kabbalah has many fascinating things to tell you about the reality of the UFO, reincarnation, out-of-body, and all of those other things, which was a part of the Jewish mysticism, and Dr. Berg and you and I will have a chance to go into that. We'll get into the out-of-body experience on October 24th with Robert Monroe of the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences. He will be here. On August 7th, Thomas Jacobson, one of the finest transmediums you'll ever have a chance to talk to, will be here, and also Dr. Peoples, who works through Thomas, will kind of interact with you. A little bit later, on September 14th, Dr. Russell Targ and Keith Harari, who was so very, very instrumental in the research that went on at the Stanford Research Institute concerning the development of ESP and remote viewing particularly. And the authors of The Mind Race will be our guest, and they have a handheld electronic device that was developed for NASA to train you in developing your ESP and remote viewing skills. You'll have a chance to talk to them about that. So we have quite an exciting summer coming up here on Open Mind. But right now we have John D. Herrera, and we're talking UFOs. How'd you get into the UFO study, John?
Well, I've always been interested in anything that's scientific or technical, and I read a lot. And my mother had seen something when she was about 13 years of age, looking out the window of grandfather's ranch. She saw this glowing object come down, land near the ranch. So she told me about that, and my grandmother had related some other stories, and I knew they were serious, yet I couldn't believe there was anything supernatural. So I've been attempting ever since to find answers to these UFOs and ghosts and what have you.
Have you found it?
Yes, I think I have. I was fortunate enough to see a UFO myself.
How close?
In 1956. Well, it was less than 100 feet. It was daylight, and there were probably 18 other people there.
Where was it? My
younger brother and I had a paper route outside of Alamosa, Colorado, the home of Snippy and a lot of UFO stories. Well, anyhow, we were delivering newspapers. It was still light. We came on to Highway 160, headed towards Blank and Fort Garland. And about 300 yards ahead of us, there was some tall trees and a farmhouse. We saw this object come around the trees and towards us on the left side of the highway. And then it shot upward into the sky and as it came alongside our pickup. Then it turned and crossed the highway directly over the top of our pickup. So it must have been maybe at the closest point 50 feet in distance. And we got a pretty good look at it. I was trying to avoid running into the other cars I was driving, so my brother got a much better look than I did. And it was rather embarrassing to say that this thing was egg-shaped. Didn't have any windows or airfoils. And just plain egg-shaped.
Just kind of worked off different principles.
I just wished it would have had a canopy and aliens looking out, but I've got to be truthful about it, and that's all I saw. But as it shot up into the sky, there was what appeared to be a flame coming out of the back of it.
It did have a flame.
So there was some kind of propulsion, ionic maybe.
Who knows?
Who knows?
It's really kind of dumb, I think, for us to try to apply our science to the science of someone who's able to get a craft here from wherever they come from, as if our little planet Earth here is the citadel of all knowledge for the universe.
With that experience, I was a confirmed believer, you might say, in UFOs, so all I had to do was find out what they were, not convince myself that they were real.
In your work with MUFON and with APRO, which are two of the finest organizations, and again, you're not interested in chaff and you're not interested in propagating a myth. You're interested in raw data, hard facts. What are some of the more outstanding things that you've come across in those investigations?
Well, my specialty is the balls of light, intelligent balls of light that are associated with UFOs. And I find that these will come into homes late at night. And
what are they?
Well, scientists keep talking about these plasma balls and ball lightning, what have you. And maybe there's two kinds, I don't know. But these things seem to have an intelligence.
There's a natural kind of ball lightning that happens.
Right, absolutely.
There are 1,800 different points on the Earth that will produce those at any given time.
Let me tell you a short story about a man in Van Nuys who's sitting in his living room watching television. It's about 10 o'clock in the evening. And his window is slightly open, and he looks over the corner of his eye, and he sees this ball of light drop out of the sky, come through that opening in the window, circle around his room, has it right at the same altitude as the posters he's got, Star Wars posters and all that, and goes along the television. And when it goes by the chair he's sitting in, it pauses for a minute, and goes around the chair, and then shoots back towards the open window and goes back out. So if that's some ball lightning, maybe so.
That's not natural ball lightning. No.
But then you take other cases where these balls of light have taken human form and spoken to people, and that kind of shoots down the ball lightning theory.
Not a natural thing.
No, not at all. In Zaytun, Egypt, in 1968, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people that saw some of these balls of light and got as close as 8 feet to some of these. And
were they
many
hot?
good photographs.
Were they hot, the balls?
Well, no, they didn't report any heat sensations, but they got some good photographs.
You have those photographs?
Not with me, but I can sure
you can sure bring
show them to anyone.
Anybody that wants to see them.
And I'm surprised there wasn't a lot of publicity on this.
You know, I have found that the best interrogators in the world are the people who listen to this program. They ask much better questions than I do. And I'll ask questions along the evening, but I want to give our audience a chance to talk to you, John, an investigator from MUFON and APRO. You're a technical writer in the aerospace industry. You understand a lot of the science that is involved. And certainly I think you're able to see that whenever a lot of these things are doing things that defy our conventional view of physics and how the world operates. Of course, we're finding out that we don't know about that there are a lot of mistakes in our electromagnetic theory. In fact, the conventional electromagnetic theory is on the shelf now. It doesn't really operate the way most people think it does. Let me give you the telephone numbers if you'd like to get in. And we'd like to talk UFOs with you tonight. Welcome aboard.
Well, hello there. I had a couple thoughts about UFOs that I wanted to relate and see if the hypothesis which emerges from this makes any sense to your guest. It seems to me UFOs are rather good at avoiding the kind of plentiful documentation that we see with things like tornadoes, and there's even a number of films that exist of meteors, fireballs going through the atmosphere and such, and yet there's hardly anything of any real quality in the motion picture film, and little besides ambiguously tiny objects on film as far as still photographs are concerned. Anyway, the point is that...
Not exactly correct, Don, but go ahead.
Okay. I'm talking about, plentiful, comfortably unambiguous evidence photographically, but they tend to avoid places where there are huge numbers of people with cameras and observatories and such.
I don't know. They've been to places where there were 10,000 people taking 10,000 pictures of them, particularly in Rome as one of the places that I remember in the last couple of years where thousands of people...
Yes, please tell us who's out there at night with a camera trying to photograph these.
Well, there are a lot of amateur astronomers, for instance, and all-night cameras of the Prairie Network that photograph meteor trails all night long, every night. And they tend to avoid being within the point of view of places like that which are steady places that for decades have been doing this. The point is, it's almost as if there's intelligence directing these that it's as if people have access to the historical record and they're able to avoid places where they can be documented by all the official sky documentation centers that exist. My point is that I think that the UFOs are they are a physical manifestation of advanced means that we will have one day in the future of looking back into the past. And the movements you describe as far as intelligent movements of a bright object in the sky is like a discontinuity in our reality caused by these looking devices of people in the future as they move their point of view from one place to another. That way they could appear to zip around and apparently defy laws of angular momentum and such, although in reality it's just like as if you take a telescope and you're looking at one part of the moon and then the other and you can zip around. Your viewpoint can zigzag impossibly fast, but it's just a matter of how you adjust your little, your telescope. Now, it's a minority theory that UFOs may come from the future, but I think that it satisfies the requirements, including the fact that the beings usually look somewhat humanoid, while in reality you'd probably expect more random reshuffling of genetic parameters that end up making an alien form in a very alien planet. So we're seeing ourselves in the future looking back at us because they're curious about us.
That probably, they've learned enough about us not to get around us too much. I mean, we're talking about getting into a snake pit here. Would you deliberately go down among this group?
Right, they are intelligent, much more so than, say, animals and so forth. They avoid us. Occasionally you're popping up and scaring the heck out of someone. Well, they don't last long enough to...
When we have a philosophy, if we don't understand it, we kill it. You don't want to get around it.
No, you see, they don't interact physically with us in real sense. They just look at us like they look like little more than a will-o'-the-wisp in the air. But in actuality, you see, time travel and such, physical laws dictate against physical interaction between time because you get into paradoxes and such. But
I hear you use some terms here, Don, called physical laws, as if the laws of physics that you're dealing with there were fingered by God on some stone on Mount Sinai and brought down. Those are not physical laws. That is just the sum total of some of the observation that some of our learned men have made, and we're finding out that those things are not laws at all, but they were incorrect hypotheses.
Well, we're talking about logic. You know what I'm talking about. Like if you go back into the past and kill your mother before she conceives you and that sort of stuff. It's logic more than like...
You saw that movie, did you?
We all tuned in last night for the time.
Really? Well, but do you see any
yes, that's a possibility.
Yes. In the possibility that UFOs are from the future.
We can't rule that out, no.
Absolutely not. We already can in the laboratory, and we have seen we can bend space-time. And, in fact, we're using that now in some of the weapon systems that are being developed here in the United States and have been developed in the Soviet Union. So bending space-time is not a physical impossibility. It is
no, that's a proven fact.
That's a proven fact, and it does happen. And we actually do it all the time. We just are not aware of the fact how we bend space-time.
We've projected our religious, perimeters in an expanding sense that a lot of people now, it's outer space. And so the things that used to be angels and poltergeist are now things from outer space. But in reality, it's whatever it is that it's at the fringe of our belief system. And I think that the popularity of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, let's not forget, the first UFO classical flying saucer shape appeared on the covers of Astounding Science Fiction in the 1920s.
No, actually, the first flying saucer descriptions appeared in the ancient Sumerian records and in the Bible.
I'm talking about an image of that, of the type that we have, the first pictorial representation that we have.
I think you'll find it in the pyramids.
Okay, but I'm just saying that the science fiction literature has colored our impression of what the limits of our consciousness are, and that's tended to color our interpretation of what these unknowns are, that we sort of project part of our spiritual thirst for the ultimate out there.
I think that's very true in effect, what you're saying.
Well, my mother saw a UFO long before that, and no fact whatsoever on that.
Sure.
She never saw that
there was quite a phenomenon here that happened about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago. It was called the Great the great spaceship thing, and it floated from Sacramento all the way up to Chicago.
Indeed, they saw airships back
then. And it looked kind of like a Jules Verne ship. Now, that's just what the consciousness of the people, they couldn't fathom anything else other than that back in the mid-1800s, and so that was the way the description of it came out.
That's exactly what I mean.
But it was seen by, tens of thousands of people.
That shows how literature and illustrations of the time tend to color people's projections of what may not quite be real reality we're familiar with suddenly appears, and we tend to sort of color it with what we...
but now we have photographs.
Things should be there. But these photographs are no good. You don't see very many really good photographs.
I don't know where you've been.
I haven't seen any really unambiguous photographs that couldn't be faked.
Well, I'm going to have to put a display up here one of these days.
Well, a lot of these UFOs are halfway between a energy and a physical state, a plasma, and they're very hard to photograph. They're very fuzzy. You can't get beyond that. There's no way you can get it.
The hypothesis that I mentioned would intend to make them not very photogenic, as you describe it. I just tend to think that that should be a direction that people should start making an effort to carry cameras with them and
they should
sort of not tell people so that the future is deprived of the knowledge of where you're going to be. You might be able to sneak up on them that way.
I appreciate your call, Don. And by the way, you're right on target with a lot of the hypothesis of many of the physicists that are working on this case, that we are looking at a form of space travel and interdimensional type of apparatus, which is very difficult for us to understand all of that. But we can see them fading in and out of this dimension at times. In fact, we have a series of photographs that shows them fading right in and out of where we are.
Well, the people in the future are going to outnumber the past, those of the present, just like we do of the past. So there's going to be a lot of people someday who will be historians, and they'll be curious to look back into the past, and I'm sure that they're looking over at dinosaurs and at the molten lavas of 1 billion years ago. But now right now it won't be too long until we'll invent those things. We'll invent that means. And when we do, then there'll be a very different world then. I think that there are implications to this hypothesis that are very, very fruitful. And we've seen a lot of metaphysical nonsense about UFOs and space people in spaceships that has tended to make UFO study a little bit less than respectable in many
right,
accounts.
Definitely.
So I think that it's kind of a stagnant way to go, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and it needs some new life in the subject.
Well, I appreciate your input.
Bye-bye.
I think you're on a good one there, Don. Thank you very much for that. I'm Bill Jenkins. It's Open Mind. We're talking different and perhaps better dynamics into this matter of the UFO. We have another Don on the line. Don, number 2. Welcome aboard.
Hi, Bill.
Yeah.
Hi, John. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you.
I have a couple of things to relate to you that you might be interested in. In this month's issue, the July issue of Modern Photography, they have a short article in there about a Norwegian young man who was out working outside of his house, and he saw a UFO, and he ran back in, and the only thing he had available was a little Kodak disc camera, one of the new ones.
Mm-hmm.
And he ran out there, and he got a couple of shots of it and everything. But a Norwegian newspaper did a major article on that, a 2-page spread, along with the pictures on the front page. And the Norwegian Air Force examined the little diskette and said there wasn't any tampering of any type with the little exposures. And so they put their stamp of approval that it was authentic. But then the diskette has been forwarded on to NASA.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
That'll be the end of it.
Well, when exactly this occurred, they didn't state, because they just put it in Modern Photography because it happened to bring up the cameras, see? And the sales of little Kodak disc cameras over in Norway went up after that.
Good.
The only way he'll get that diskette back is through the Freedom of Information Act, and they'll have it tacked to that somewhere. Meanwhile, there will be another report saying that it was nothing. We've seen that happen too many times.
I wanted to bring up, you had a guest on a few years ago, Bill, that it was because of that guest. He was talking about UFOs, and I don't recall who it was, whether it was Hynek or maybe even the Gladdens. But it recalled an event that occurred many years ago when I was 15 years old, back in 1952. And I had completely forgotten it until your guest was on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I was headed for New York on a Greyhound bus. I got on at L.A. here. And I had a young man sitting next to me. I was 15. He must have been about 22 or 23 years old. And clean-cut looking kid. He was on his way back to Ohio. He was on leave, but he was wearing civilian clothes. So we did a little chit-chatting back and forth and whatnot, and I told him things that were interesting me at 15, and he talked about different things. But somehow we got on the subject of astronomy and other things, and I happened to ask him somewhere along the line, what did he think about these flying saucers, see?
They were getting to be very big then.
Yeah, so we bantered it back and forth, see, but then he said, there's something, he said, I can tell you. He said, but it would freak you out. And I'd come back to that every once in a while in the conversation.
What did he tell you that freaked you out?
He wouldn't. He wouldn't tell me. He'd get very agitated, very solemn. But he was stationed at a base in Ohio. And if I remember correctly, that's back there where that Hangar 18 was at.
Sounds like it might have been right
He
there.
might have known something.
He was an MP there. See, but I kept pressing on that. And he would get agitated, but he wouldn't tell me. He would just say, there's something I can tell you, but it would just freak you out. And I never found out what
do you have his
he meant
name?
by that. But when we hit, ordinarily, when we hit...
John, do you happen to have that guy's name?
No, I sure don't. I'll tell you this, Bill. I'm going to finish this up here. Ordinarily, we would have transferred and gone our separate ways at Chicago. I'd have gone on to New York, and he'd have transferred over to a bus for Ohio. But we hit a stopover at Kansas City and got off for a rest stop. And we got back on. He wasn't on that bus. I mean, I was used to talking to this guy all the way. And all of a sudden, he's not on the bus at Kansas City. He didn't get back on. That seat was empty.
Well, that was a very unusual time in the early 50s.
It was, see, and there weren't any cults or anything else back in those days. And there wasn't a lot of information around about it. But I had that curiosity, but I just kept probing at him. Every once in a while, I didn't bear down too hard, but I looped the conversation back. But he would come to that same point. I'd like to tell you, but I cannot tell you. But he'd say it would freak you out.
During that period, the late 40s to the early 50s, Wright-Patman Air Force Base and Edwards Air Force Base, that was the center of all UFO studies that the government was engaged in at that time.
All right. Well,
it's now been extended to all over.
But the thing I'm thinking now, Bill, is if this fella is out there now and he hears this show, he could prove that he was on that bus with me because only he knows the month that he was on that bus, that I was on there with him. That's the one thing. He could call in and say, hey, I was on that bus with a young fellow, and it was this month and this week.
Well, if you were on the bus, Guy...
If you ever get a chance to contact him, I'd sure like to hear from him.
I'd like to have him call into the show if he's listening to this.
1952.
Now you know what I couldn't tell you.
All right.
That's the year the CIA had their meeting and decided to ridicule UFO reports.
Right.
Most people don't know about that.
I didn't remember that, Bill, until you had somebody on there, and I never put the pieces together.
That sounds like I may have had Bill Moore on at the time.
And that whole thing came back to me.
All right.
I mean, that was 1952 when I was 15, and now I'm 48, and all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, it came right back up to me. This is what this young fellow was trying to tell me, but he couldn't.
He may have very well had the skinny on something there. Don, thank you very much for your call.
Bill.
Appreciate that very much.
Okay, take care.
I'm Bill Jenkins. We're talking UFOs tonight with John D. Herrera. Listen, Tony, you want some hard evidence? What's on your mind?
Hi, yes. Hi, fellas. My questions for your guests are these. Number one, I'd like to know what his process of verification is. For example, with the Van Nuys man who claimed that he saw this intelligent ball of light. I mean, a man reports that. Do you simply take his word for that?
No, absolutely not. There's so many other cases, though. I read everything I can find on that subject. The technical libraries are full of cases such as that.
People that have reported that particular kind of incident.
Right.
Okay. And the other thing is, do you contend that a big city newspaper reporter has either never seen one of these UFOs or has had the story squashed by his editor?
What are you saying?
Well, what I'm saying is, why in the world let's take a guy like Jack Nelson from the LA Times, or really any reporter.
believe it was in the 60s, the government decided to hire Arthur Godfrey to do some radio spots debunking UFOs. And before they got started on that, Arthur Godfrey encountered a UFO while flying across the country on his own plane, and that killed that.
I might bring up something else to you, Tony, there was a gentleman who wasn't exactly a Jack Nelson of the Los Angeles Times, but who saw the UFO along with a group of other men. They were at a church function, in fact, and he reported that and gave a detailed description of that to MUFON, in fact, and signed his name to it, and was really going to have this investigated as he was running for the presidency of the United States. And when Jimmy Carter became the president of the United States, after he had trumped about this for so long, then all at once he became very, very quiet about this matter of the UFO.
Okay, I wonder if, Bill, when the...
You want to hang on there, Tony? There's our little orchestra.
Okay,
which
would
means
you
we're
relate
going to take...
the New York and England incidents?
Okay, we'll get into that right after the news.
Thank you.
Tony had asked us about the situation in England and also in northern New York. Very briefly, we have a case that started last year at an American Air Force base, which borders onto an RAF base up there. And I forget, I want to say Bretton Woods, but that's not it. But it's in north central England. Because it is American territory, Freedom of Information Act has been able to pull documentation, the official reports that have come out of the Air Force on that case. There was a landing. There was contact with officers at the base, with those that were on board. Initially, it may have been a malfunctioning of that spacecraft, but a number of military personnel were able to see that. There is a book now being written about the incident that the information...
Who's the author of that, Bill?
I don't know offhand. I know that Larry Fawcett was working on it, and Alan Hynek was working on it. Now, whether they were working on the book, they were certainly working on the information, which is, I suppose, if you really wanted to get a lot of the information, you could contact the Center for UFO Studies in Phoenix. Do you have that number handy?
Yes, I do. I've worked with the Center for many years.
Why don't you give them that number, and they'll be glad to send you all of the information they can on it.
Certainly.
All right.
Dr. Hynek was with the Air Force for 25 years investigating UFOs. And that was not a serious effort. They couldn't get the funding they needed.
Well, he was a classical skeptic when he started.
Right, definitely. So it's possible there were other groups in the government that were doing some serious UFO work. Certainly the NSA has 5 times the funding the CIA has, and they could afford to do a little of that.
Everything that you touch has their imprimatur on it,
Definitely.
it seems like. But what is Dr. Hynek's number for people who want to know more about the English
I have to dig through my billfold.
You dig through that. The other incident was the Brewster, New York incident, which happened last summer, and in fact there were television pictures that were even shown here in Los Angeles of that, where thousands of people who lived in upstate New York around Brewster. Now, this is a sow's ear area. We're not talking about illiterate farmers out on the field somewhere. These were business executives of all different kind, people of great stature as far as, having some smarts about them is concerned. And this great skeletal-type craft appeared for many nights in a row, lighted, hovering, moving very, very slowly over the area. It stopped traffic on the throughways up there, in fact, as people would stop and just watch this thing move around. It always came at night. Now, during this, there were some pranksters that got into their light airplanes and started flying in formation at night and trying to kick up a little storm, but they grounded them for a while, but they had no reason to ground them, so they let them fly some more. But there are 2 different things. They had a village meeting in Brewster, New York, where 1,200 people attended it, and these were residents of the area that live in the very expensive homes. 800 of them were eyewitnesses to the event. It cannot be attributed to just the little guys running around in their light planes trying to jostle the folks up. And as I recall, that started around March and went on through June and July of last year. And that wasn't the first time it had happened. It had happened a couple of years before.
Definitely. There were more than 800 people that reported seeing UFOs there around New York. And there was quite a controversy over whether it was the private planes that were causing all of these. But it's possible we had both.
Well, private planes have a hard time flying at 4 and 5 miles an hour and hovering, which hundreds of witnesses reported seeing. They didn't see as...
Probably the slowest Cessna with STOL equipment would be about 40 or 45
in
miles
a good
per hour.
headwind.
In a good headwind, certainly.
But something very definitely
but
went on.
But it couldn't make a sharp turn or do anything like that.
The things that happened. And here was an incident where it was seen by thousands of people.
Certainly. And
they all were not having mass hysteria at the same time or mass hallucinations of exactly the same order. And but very little official attention was paid to it. The FAA said that they're not violating any of their regulations, so they're not interested. NASA people came up and said nothing. Other government people came up and just watched. But that was about it. And nobody knows what that was all about or what they was doing, and then they went away, I think, in August.
Well, that's the way it always happens with the UFOs. They just fade away.
Come do their thing.
Right.
All right. John, you're on the line. Can we help you?
Yes, I have 2 questions.
All right.
What is exactly bending time? What happened?
Bending space-time.
Bending space-time.
Space warps is what he's probably talking about.
I think that's it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we know that with Einstein's work that the higher the velocity, slower the time, and there can be space warps and so forth in this variation of time.
Does the clock slow down?
Right.
Yeah. So what?
There was a very interesting little program on Channel 11 last night about time travel. They were also promoting that new movie.
Could it be possibly a time illusion?
Well, no, I tell you, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but let me point you to July 27th when Tom Bearden will be here, who is probably one of the nation's leading theoretical physicists, and he will explain bending space-time because it's very important to understand how we're having our weather controlled at the moment on it. But you must remember that time and even space, as far as that goes, distance from one point to another, is something that we have manufactured in our mind to satisfy the needs of our 5 senses so that we can cope with the reality of the world that we live in. But there is a lot more to the reality of the world we live in than time. And time actually doesn't exist except to us. It's a local phenomenon for our unevolved selves, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, not material.
If you were to give you an example of how you could bend space-time and how perhaps a lot of this traveling is done from great distances, we have the notion that you can't travel faster than the speed of light. Well, we know that that's not true anymore. But
particles
that you won't do that.
Violating that
all the time. Yeah. I saw some experiments the other day where electromagnetic waves were shooting out at about 8 times the speed of light. But if you imagine a piece of paper in your hand, right, and you're at point A, which is at one corner, and on the opposite corner of the paper is point B, and let's say that's 500 light years across there as we reckon things. And the best we could do, it would take us 500 years to get there if we could travel at the speed of light, right? But if you simply fold that piece of paper where the 2 points come together, you could get from point A to point B in a microsecond.
Definitely.
And that's bending space-time.
Space-time.
Does that help you?
Kind of, yeah.
All right. Don't ask me to go much deeper than that, John, because we'll have Mr. Bearden get into that when he's here on the 27th.
Another question.
Mm-hmm.
I called you earlier this year about sighting us over L.A.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember that? I called on a Monday morning.
Could you go over that briefly?
Go over it again, then.
Yeah.
You called me in the newsroom?
Yeah.
Okay.
And went very slowly. I thought for about 15 minutes. 2 nights in a row at 1:30 in the morning. I was just wondering if anything had ever come of that.
I do remember that now, John. I did bring that information to Alan Hynek's attention that very morning, in fact.
Uh-huh.
And I think he had some of his people working on it. I must tell you, I haven't got any feedback from Alan on that.
Well, I couldn't see it.
Anything.
It was
Alan
cloudy the next night.
a lot. Do I?
It was cloudy the next night.
Yeah.
But it was really strange. I saw the same exact thing 2 nights in a row.
That is strange. However, Southern California is a volatile area.
So I'm glad I got it on the air, so in case someone saw it.
All right. Well, I'd like to, if somebody saw it, too, they get back to us.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, John. Thank you very much. I'm Bill Jenkins. It's Open Mind. We're talking flying saucer. Remind you of something that's coming up beginning October 12th. We're all going to London, you, I, everybody that wants to go, as a part of the KABC Travel Club. Going to spend a week over there. And it's a great way and an inexpensive way for you to go to London. And while we're over there, we're going to visit some of the famous ghost houses in London. We'll travel up to Stonehenge. We will be with some of London's famous mediums. We are trying to arrange, and I think we will be able to meet with Lord Kilkenny and of the House of Lords, and then give us a briefing on the Parliament's investigation into the UFO phenomenon. And we're going to have a grand time, and you're invited to go as a part of the KABC Travel Club. Chucky Travel, who handles all of that, has made some great arrangements for us over there. We have almost a whole hotel to ourselves. Took a while to get that because the dollar is so strong in England that all the hotel rooms were full. So we had to put it off to October where we could get a large enough block. Now, if you'd be interested in finding out about what it takes to get there, and I assure you that it'll be the most inexpensive way you could ever go to London and have some open mind fun along the way, why don't you drop me a line? Just send it to Bill Jenkins, London Trip, KABC. That's at 3321 South La Cienega Boulevard. I'll get that over to Chucky Travel. His group will contact you, and then away we are. And I would like for as many of us to go as possible. You know, Ken and Bob's always taking people everywhere, but we have the open mind bunch. We know how to have fun. We can have fun on all levels. We'll outdo them. And I'd like to have you come along with us. It's October 12th, and if you've got a week available then and want to go with us over to London, we'd like to have you go. So just write me, give me your name, address, and telephone number, and how we can contact you, and then you work it out with Chucky Travel, and he'll make it very easy for you. Okay, we have Rosendo on the line. Hello.
Hello, Bill. Hello, Mr. Herrera. In the classes that I took at the university, they dogmatically insisted that things were a certain way, and thanks to you, Bill, on bringing all these programs, it has stimulated my thinking into knowing that other things are possible. And my question to you, Mr. Herrera, is simple. It was reported on the wire that there was a city, 120-some buildings, some on 15 stories high, found out in Peru somewhere, close to the spaceport that's up in the mountains there.
At the Nazca Plains, yes.
You're right. Have you gotten any information on that as to how long that city's been down there or what?
No, I read the same thing. It was just recently, a couple days ago, I believe.
Yeah, so
I'd like to get more information on that.
That's not Machu Picchu, then?
No, it's supposed to be the largest city ever found.
Yeah, they reported something like 120 buildings already.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anyway, thank you very much, and thanks for bringing this information to us, Bill. I really appreciate it. I'm beginning to know that there's something else out there that the books didn't tell me about.
That's right. There's a lot of it, and I thank you for the information. I hadn't heard about the big city. We may make that another open mind trip. We'll go down to Peru.
Thank you, and have a nice evening.
And check that out. Thank you, Rosendo.
Yes, sir.
Glad to have you aboard. All right, Jim, you're on.
Okay, Bill. I just called. I'm a pretty skeptical person myself, and I have a relative who's a general officer in the service. He's retired now, and he worked at the Pentagon, and he did work to some extent with the UFO question. And we were sitting around in the backyard one night just kind of shooting the breeze, and we started kidding him around about little green men and this kind of thing. And he got very serious, and he said, it's no joke. He said, they actually exist, and we know they're not from this planet. We have parts of the vehicles, detailed drawings, and we're incorporating some of the aerodynamic designs in future aircraft. He said, I can't say anything more than that. In fact, he said, I probably said too much already. And the reason the service and NASA and all these other companies or organizations don't come out and make any statements is because they don't want to alarm people and start a media circus. That's what they claim.
Well, no, they don't want to upset the bureaucratic apple cart and
well, I'm sure that's part of it.
Contracts taken away from
too. There'd be all kinds of ramifications. But this relative is a very conservative person, and he's not at all the type of person that would make those kind of statements unless they're true.
Well, we get a lot of military people saying similar things.
Yeah, so there's no doubt in my mind that they exist. There's no doubt in my mind that we have parts of the flying machines or whatever they are, probably at places like Wright Pat. I know there are some some facilities in Virginia where they have a lot of the documentation, photos, this kind of thing, and also they have flight recorder tapes, too.
Langley Field, they call it the Space Museum now.
Yeah, that could be it, but I know they also have flight tapes from the pilots and this kind of thing, too. So, I don't know, there's no, as far as the, I think we should call them IFOs, identified flying objects, because there's no question in my mind that they're out there, and the only reason that I hung on was that I just wanted to sort of verify what y'all are saying, that anybody who's skeptical about it, they could put their mind at rest.
Well, I thank you very much for that, Jim, and your relative really did touch upon a sensitive part as far as the government is concerned, and that is the conversion of what they have found out into modern-day hardware.
Yes, that's right. The thing is this, Bill, I realize, with a situation like this where it's like anonymous calls and everything, that kooks can call in, but...
We tried,
Believe me, I'm very serious, and this relative of mine is a career military man, and as I say, he's very conservative, and he doesn't make these kind of statements, and I was really shocked when he started talking about it.
Would he like to talk off the record, totally off the record?
Well, I really doubt that he would. It's the old bugaboo, about worrying something might happen or something of this sort.
Afraid he'll lose his retirement or something.
Yeah, there's a million reasons, and by his nature that he is very conservative, it probably would extend to something like this, too. But I just thought I'd mention it because, of course, those people who believe it will always believe it, and those who don't won't.
Definitely.
But there's no question in my mind that it's true.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your relative who was in the Air Force, and certainly so many of the Air Force people know that all of this is true.
Yeah.
We're seeing more and more of them speak up now as time goes by, and they see the total impropriety of government in hiding this, as they have in the past. I think we're caught in a bureaucratic quagmire.
I'm just sorry I can't be more explicit, Bill, but because I know it sounds, a little vague in a way, but it is the absolute truth.
They're real, absolutely.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
I thank you very much for that input, and it's good to know. See?
And if the skeptics still have their $10,000 offer, they can just contact me.
Yeah,
I'm ready to go.
You really want to take on the skeptics.
Why are they running from me?
Yeah, there they are, just running away. They don't want to get into it because all you have to do to take their $10,000 is to give them a long list of things that are available from the federal government now through the Freedom of Information Act that puts a great deal of validity.
I threw in ghosts and apparitions so they would be sure to take me up on it, but that's
too easy to prove.
Run and hide.
All right, I'm Bill Jenkins with John D. Herrera. We'll be back in just... And you're certainly invited to talk. We have a few lines open. Let me give you the numbers if you want to get in.
John?
Good evening.
Good evening. I wanted to, I'm kind of interjecting not an opposing viewpoint, just kind of a different perspective.
Welcome aboard. Let's have it.
Okay. There's been a lot of brain research done on the holographic model. Are you familiar with it, Bill?
To some degree, yes.
What's happening is there's a lot of different frequencies that are being interpreted by our senses, our five senses, and then they're transformed. But when, let's say, like they hit the eye, they're transformed into optical light waves, and then the brain does a Fourier transform and turns it into an objective pattern, brainwave pattern, which is transmitted to the cortex of the brain. And what we're visualizing is, because the eye is a receptor, we're visualizing on the back of our brain, on the visual cortex, a neural pattern, a three-dimensional neural pattern. We're not seeing the outside world. And so the thing is that they believe that what's a part of the holographic part of it, the whole is what we're perceiving in our mind. With the hologram, the photographic plate, there's a timeless dimension. And when we're talking about outer space, what we're possibly could be perceiving is a dimension inside of our mind. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, let me sort of figure out in my own mind what you were trying to say. Our mind is a computer, and it's set to a certain reality. And it receives information visually, let's say, that's transformed into electromagnetic signals that the little static discharges in our mind can understand, and the computer says, oh, that means this, and then that's what we end up seeing. Did that simplify it?
It's alternate reality, I guess.
It's a representation.
Right.
And so the thing is that what people are seeing, if
if what they're saying is that with the holographic plate, the part, if any little piece is broken off the holographic in the holographic picture, the whole picture is contained in that little part. And what the thing is that what each person knows, common to each person, is the content of our mind, that holographic reality. And so what type of energies that people are and belief systems that are today are being projected into this in other words, we can read out of this holographic reality or this model and see reality by what everybody is viewing as reality at this point in time. Like this, the other man, Don, I believe, said that these people that are in the future, this space bending of space-time, they're looking back at us.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't explain, though, how the camera picks these things up also. You know, it doesn't have its little computer up there. It's just going to give us a picture of what it sees.
Correct. And if this reality is affected by things in your past, then different individuals would have different realities, whether slightly different at least. In our reports, we're very consistent. People see the same type of thing. We have sometimes hundreds or thousands of people visualize a UFO, and the sightings are, descriptions are the same.
It would be beyond coincidence, I think, if you sat 1,000 witnesses, and of course you've had that many, many times, and they all are describing basically the same thing. Now, we know that they'll probably describe it a little different, like you and I would describe the same automobile accident if we both were to witness it, slightly different, but it would be basically the same thing.
We basically see the same reality.
Right.
I see.
But it's a good notion, and I certainly don't want to put it down, because a lot of that does happen in the mind. Your mind translates some things that it can see that it doesn't understand and tries to simplify that into something that it does understand. And I think a classic example of that would be the account that Ezekiel wrote about his encounter with a UFO. Now, this was totally outside of his consciousness, what he was seeing, and
he didn't have any technical background for describing
background. He was
wheel upon a wheel and so forth.
He was a very good reporter, as it turns out,
yes, he did
reporting what he saw the best he knew how to saw it, but the best that he saw it. And everything that he saw just defied anything that he knew could possibly exist.
Plus, his interpretation has been translated several times and probably changed in the translation.
This was the chariot that he saw.
Right.
The wheel within the wheel. And he actually saw guys come out of the spacecraft and land with backpacks on, saw the ships land, heard the ships talking to the people on the ground, giving command, and he was actually able to see the commander of the ship sitting up there in his throne. He would call it a throne. He didn't know anything else. It was a great big chair like we have on a space shuttle.
Certainly, that's one of the finest ancient sightings.
Well, how about that the field of energy at that point in time where he was or where anybody else is conducive to being able to perceive? In other words, he may be able to perceive that the energy at that point in time would be such that he would be looking into the future.
Well, it's hard to say what kind of energy field was doing him around. It certainly flattened him out for a while.
We don't know anything about UFO energies.
Yeah.
We can speculate. We're learning a little.
Ezekiel did talk about the fire as if it were a rocket of using a propellant, as we understand things. And a lot of the ancient accounts show rockets that were belching fire, much like
the one I saw really didn't look like a chemical fire or something you'd see behind a rocket. More like maybe electrical ionized propulsion. It was weird.
An ionized field or a plasma.
It was colorful, though. There was several colors.
Well, how about the thing of the illusions that exist in our life, where we are looking through our eye, but if that image is upside down because of the curvature of our eye, the concave curvature of our eye inverts the image that's coming in. And
it gets rightened back up again when it gets back into the rod.
We would have problems with the
what are we really seeing? What are we actually seeing?
Not just UFOs.
Pardon me?
We would have difficulties with other things, not just UFOs.
I'm sure if you stood in my backyard, Mark, and looked at the willow tree that I have back there, and I'm looking at it too, and I'm standing beside you, we're basically seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
All right, Mark?
Okay.
All right.
Thank
you very much.
Bye-bye.
But that is a good point. We do sort of, if we cannot understand the information that we're getting, whether it's visual or whatever, we will try to accommodate it.
We do, definitely.
As best we can. We have Paul on the line. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
I have two questions to ask Mr. Herrera.
Yes.
But firstly, let me say I'm a total skeptic.
Welcome aboard. Glad to have you here.
All right, thank you. Your program.
Are you willing to?
Your program is very interesting. My first question is this.
Right.
In your knowledge, have these objects ever been observed objectively? Most of the information I hear about is anecdotal, with the exception of so-called photographic evidence. In other words, have there ever been radar reflections noted, or spectroscopic observations, or magnetometer observations? In other words...
You get me the equipment, I'll be out there tonight.
Beg pardon?
I'm still trying to get my hands on proper equipment to get out there myself with spectrographs and what have you.
Well, you say the government has been involved, and there's a freedom of information business going on. Is there evidence that this type of device has been used?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, there is. Bill Moore was with us here about 2 months ago.
Bill has a lot of the documents.
With a whole new body of information of the Air Force intelligence that they had gained over many, many years, and it goes into great detail about the testing that they used, the material that was used, the equipment that was used, and the conclusions that were drawn from that. Yes, there has been very scientific analysis of the phenomenon. Phenomenon, I think, is a wrong word. It's
phenomena is.
Yeah, it really is. It is the wrong word. But there has been extensive scientific study that is rather conclusive in the fact that they are not ours, and they are not from another country, and that they are terribly unnatural. And that comes right out. That's from the federal government.
But what we do have is photon reception.
Right.
In other words, there are actually photons.
Hearing and touch,
taste.
Plus our hearing and our touch, tactile sensory.
There is tactile sensory perception?
Taste.
All right, my second question is this. How come none of the observatories in California, I have in mind Mount Wilson, Mount Hamilton, and Palomar, have never made an observation of this type?
They have made. Astronomers, 2 separate polls that I can think of found that 5% of astronomers had seen UFOs. And
they've never been reported in any of the astronomical journals.
Just try it. I'll get you some good reports and see if you can get them in there, okay? Some very good reports.
Yeah, you remember, too, particularly a place like Mount Palomar, they are involved in deep space research. That time is leased, and it's well in advance, and if they're going to watch this galaxy, for instance, that's a far, far away, they have waited a long time to take their photographs and do their study, and they're not really interested in anything else. The only time they really see something is happens to cross over while they're taking a picture.
That is correct. What about Mount Hamilton?
They're involved in the same thing.
Well, they're not doing deep space work.
But they have specific tasks that the astronomers are involved in.
That is true.
They can't even see our shuttle and satellites with their telescopes. They're focused so many light years away, there's no way they could see a UFO that
all right,
but
the point of the discussion is that you are telling me that purely objective measurements have been made?
Yes.
Huh.
There are tons of radar blips, if you want to look at those, that are available.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, they really are.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Paul?
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
I think one of the most dramatic of the radar pulses was the flap that came over Washington, D.C. Radar showed them doing in 1952, doing very, very strange maneuvers, and that caused the Air Force to totally scramble because of the radar pulses.
Well, it's been classified. The CIA in 52 decided to ridicule reports, and the Air Force came out with a regulation saying the only reports released are those that could be explained as natural phenomenon, and that's been the policy.
And prior to that, the government was pretty open about it.
These documents are available if you'd like to view them.
They're easy to get. You just have to know which ones to ask for, and if you want to know which ones, write me, and I'll make sure that you get the right codes so that they have to send them to you, because, you see, as a citizen of the country, you own those reports. And they have to give them to you. Okay, Paul?
Yeah, thank you. You've really aroused my curiosity now.
Good. That's what we're all about, and I'm delighted I've done it. And thank you so much for calling in.
Good night.
Yep.
I'm Bill Jenkins. With me, John D. Herrera. It's Open Mind, a group of people who are very serious about separating the wheat from the chaff, about UFO sightings, UFO reports, and what they mean to all of us. And we're open to you to talk to John about the UFO, like Eileen. What's on your mind?
Well, I've been a UFO buff since 1954, and no one can tell me that they have not appeared. They've been seen all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
I feel sorry that there are so many people with closed mind who only believe that the intelligence exists only on Earth. With a vast amount of space and universe, I could never believe this. I might tell you that I have, while I was waiting, I pulled out a letter from my file, which was written by Robert Kennedy on May 9th, 1968.
Mm-hmm.
And he states his interest in UFO and hopes that the government will pursue the investigation further, which he carried a card with this association, and I still am carrying the same card today. What I believe that maybe also what people do not recognize is that the flying saucers and those who are propelling them or whatever are so highly evolved that they can materialize and dematerialize at will. That's why they might see them for a moment, and then they think that they're traveling at thousands of miles or whatever.
I don't know whether they dematerialize or not, but they certainly can cloak them.
I really think they do, Bill. I think she's right on hitting the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
That's.
Well, I'm glad that you agree, because that has been my thought for so long, and I was just wondering what your thoughts were along those lines.
I don't know if they can become a nuts and bolts spacecraft, but they can manipulate a plasma and take various shapes. They can expand in size and contract and so forth. That's very definite.
It's a science we have great difficulty in.
We're struggling to do just that.
Deal with, unless you're on the outer limits of, as some of our scientists are, and they have certainly learned a lot from the
fusion energy. We'd like to be able to control a plasma.
Mm-hmm.
We know it magnetically. We could control it, but we just can't seem to build the equipment to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you got to remember that we are dealing with what some of the physicist friends that I have and am associated with, we have built a technology on the garbage of science, and we're just now beginning to find out what real science, pristine science, is all about. And we've wasted a lot of technological time in what we have done. And now we're beginning to understand a little bit about what they're doing, because they've gotten down to the real thing. Okay, Eileen?
Well, yes, and I think that there are people as well that can materialize and dematerialize as well.
We have a lot of examples of that.
Yes.
I have some photographs I'd like to show you sometime.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Appreciate that call. It's Open Mind tonight. John D. Herrera. We're talking about the UFO. Herrera. And Edison is on the line right now. Edison, welcome aboard.
Okay.
Edson it is.
It's Edson, yes.
Hi, Edson.
How are you? Good evening, Mr.
Hi.
Jenkins.
Hi,
Mr. Herrera. First, I'd like to mention this coming July the 10th is the anniversary, the 129th birth anniversary of Nikola Tesla, who
Yes, it is.
did so much for...
My favorite eccentric and genius.
Well, interestingly enough, Ryan Aircraft in the 1960s was working on a saucer-shaped aircraft that was supposed to use Tesla coils as propulsion unit. I don't know if you know about that, but what I wanted to ask was about the alleged abduction of two women in Tahunga, California in the 1950s by UFO. Have you heard about that?
There's a book out, Tahunga Canyon Contacts. Is this by Andrew Ruffle? Is this the case you're talking about?
Yes. I don't know that much about it, but I wondered if you could comment on it.
I don't know a lot about it. I know Ann Druffel very well, and she asked me to hypnotize one of these gals. In fact, I tried hypnotizing both of them. One of them failed. Couldn't get her to concentrate.
Yes, I understand that Tahunga in the American Indian language of the area meant place of the Tahunga, and no one knows what Tahunga meant, so perhaps there were UFOs back then. Also, have you heard any reports about